Welcome to the Naavik Gaming Podcast, where it is our mission to explore the business and future of video games. We bring together the industry's brightest builders, investors, and thinkers to keep a pulse on current events, dissect emerging trends in games, share lessons learned, and have a great time. This podcast is also part of Naavik's growing ecosystem, which ranges from free and premium research to consulting and advisory services. For more information, visit www.naavik.co. Now, let's jump into the episode.
Greetings, citizens. Welcome to the Naavik Gaming Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Takei, and this is the interview segment. Joining us today is Sam Rosenthal, the founder and CEO of a game studio called The Game Band, which is a pretty dope name if I've ever heard one. It's a award-winning studio that's responsible for two games, Where Cards Fall and the virality that is the game Blaseball, which if you haven't heard about, you'll for sure know about after today's episode. Sam Studio is backed by VCs like Makers and OneUp, and today we'll be focusing on what Blaseball is, and in my opinion, it's the closest thing to a mile, a massively interactive live event, without any of the buzzword tech gadgets, cloud gaming, Twitch-integrated gaming, blockchain that we purportedly need to create those experiences. So we'll be talking about Blaseball and the studio itself. So welcome to the pod, Sam.
Thanks very much for having me.
Woo! And so before we get started on the episode, reiterating and sharing a few announcements regarding GDC. First, Naavik will be co-hosting a party with Leanplum next week on March 23rd at 8 p.m. We've already announced this, but sharing once more on air. We have 200 limited spots, so if you'd like to come meet some of the Naavik folks and then hang out with us and network with some of the industry's best, RSVP in the link below in the show notes. Second, some of you guys might remember our crypto skepticism podcast that we hosted earlier this fall, and I'm delighted to share that we'll be continuing the conversation at GDC this year in panel format. On Tuesday, we'll be closing out the free-to-play summit 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. with myself, Ethan Levy, Doff's #1 crypto kid, Tim Morton, the CEO of Frost Giant, and one more addition, Mark Otero, CEO and founder of Azra Games. We're going to have a rigorous debate about the good, the bad, skepticism, and optimism of Web3 games. Once more, 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. Post two great talks you also shouldn't miss by Don Norbury of Shrapnel and David Fox of Double Coconut. You can find details about the panel, which is titled Do Video Games Need the Blockchain, on schedule.gdcconf.com or by using the link in the show notes below. So Sam, I apologize. I had to do a little bit of the GDC shilling, but I gave you a brief overview, but I would love to have you introduce yourself a bit more robustly. Tell us about your background prior to the Game Band and how you founded the studio.
Sure. So I'm Sam. I'm the founder and CEO of the Game Band. The Game Band has actually been around for some time. I founded it back in 2015, and we've had a fairly unusual history. We weren't venture backed until 2021, so we actually spent our first 5 or so years working as a publisher-funded studio. So we had a game, Where Cards Fall, that was it began its life as my student project back when I was in college, and I kept working on it after I took a variety of different jobs in the games industry. I worked at Activision for some time. I worked at a smaller studio called Giant Sparrow for a little bit too. And eventually it became one of the launch titles for Apple Arcade. Blaseball, what we're going to talk a lot about today, it began as a side project to see if we could find a way to design a game that could bring people together during the pandemic. And it took off in ways that we never expected. It attracted venture funding, which made a lot more sense for the type of game that Blaseball is, and completely transformed the way that we've been thinking about the studio.
That's awesome. And I would love actually, first of all, an amazing story in terms of the impetus and the birth of the studio. I think a lot of studios that we hear about today are commonly almost the reverse. They have venture-backed funding and then they're looking the publisher route. So you're a bit of you're a bit old school, I guess. And I would love to kind of hear, why Blaseball seems more venture backable than, from the investor perspective. But before we kind of go there, I want to kind of talk about Blaseball in general. And to start out, I admittedly have not played Blaseball. I've only observed people who play Blaseball, which I guess is the sort of the point. I think 99% of the people who watch the NBA don't play basketball. But I struggle to describe Blaseball to others. I've always been like, hey, have you heard of this game called Blaseball? And the person's like, no. And then I'm like, well, and then I spew this discursive and circuitous nonsensical summary where I'm like, oh, it's baseball, but on a web browser, and there's murder, and people have weird stats, and the developers fuck with everything, and it's kind of funny, and it's sort of like Twitch plays Pokemon. And then my summary is
all accurate,
not very good. So can you tell us what Blaseball is in your own words?
I think the best way to think about Blaseball is like a massively multiplayer tabletop role-playing game. So on the surface, Blaseball is this absurdist horror baseball league, and it is powered by a simulation, and the players, or the fans, they get to jump in and watch these simulated games unfold. They can bet fake money on the games, and they can cash in their earnings to vote to enact change in the league. And those changes can range from like rule changes, like adding an extra base, to more mysterious changes, like opening the forbidden book, which they did, and it led to players getting incinerated all across the league. And so that's the part that feels kind of like a tabletop game. You know, they're watching these kind of random and simulated events unfold, and they're choosing what is interesting to them, and then they're telling us like, hey, this is the thing that we want to change, and then we improvise with them and enact their change in the game, and it gives them this feeling of ownership over the story in a way that very few games have.
Got it. And I want to dig a ton deeper into community interaction, but before we go there, what exactly do the players do? Like, what is the moment-to-moment gameplay? You just talked about like voting and, you know, opening the forbidden book, but is it a third-person RPG where I walk through a room and I find the forbidden book and I open it? You know, describe the actual mechanics of the game. What does it optically kind of look like?
So you're playing as a fan. So unlike, you know, MLB The Show or so, you're not stepping up to the plate and swinging the bat. You are watching the league and changing it. The way that actually works in practice is it sort of plays out like an idle game or a clicker game where you're seeing these simulated games that look almost like if you're following along with the game on, say, a sports app on your iPhone, where you can see the game logs and the scores change and things like that. It's very UI driven. And then what the fans do is they can bet just by clicking like a bet button on the games. We show the odds and things like that. And then, you know, they can check back in throughout the day to see what they've won. And we have a tab where they can vote. And every week we have different election items up for vote. So the game itself, the thing that's really important to take away is that it is live. Like, it is a game that happens 24 hours a day in real time. So it is not something that you could, you know, sit down and like play for 6 hours to get ahead of anybody else. You are seeing the same things as every other player and seeing the results of your choices at the same time as they do.
Got it. So it is very much like that Twitch plays Pokemon habituated behavior where, like, if it's Blaseball season and I'm sitting in science class, I'm playing Blaseball because it's not like I can play when I go home. I need to be tracking live stats just like I'd be tracking or watching, you know, a live football game or a soccer game or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And so how do I win?
I guess winning is it's a tough one because what you're really trying to do is help your team win. So every fan is a fan of a particular team. We have teams like the Baltimore Crabs and the Kansas City Breath Mints. They all have like ridiculous names, and we have these seasons that last 1 week. So throughout the week, you're helping your team in various ways, or watching what your choices did. And then at the end of the week, you make new choices to help them win the next week. So that's part of winning. But then the other part of it is that there's this overarching story that the fans get attached to. In our very first, we call kind of a storyline an era. So in our very first era of Blaseball, the fans were fighting this giant peanut god, and they had to find a way to defeat the peanut god. So there's also this like big giant plot and through line outside of just the week by week, can I win the season?
Okay, I see. And so I would ostensibly just choose a team, the Kansas City Breath Mints, because my friends are rooting for the Kansas City Breath Mints, or do I switch and rotate teams throughout seasons? How does that work?
You can switch if you want to, but we tell players to just follow their heart and pick the team that resonates the most with them. The funny thing is that every team has developed its own culture. So, the teams right now, the fans, they organize in our Discord. There's a lot of fans in our Discord, and our Discord is set up to basically have channels for each individual team. So if you jump in and you're a fan of the Kansas City Breath Mints, you're just going to see the channel for the Kansas City Breath Mints, and you'll start to see like the slogans and the what players they're attached to, their voting strategy, all of that stuff right within there. And most of that developed organically. There's some little bits of flavor and texture that we gave to these teams at the beginning, but a lot of it is through how the fans are interpreting what they're seeing.
I see. Okay. So to just wrap my head around this, and now that I can give a better non-discursive summary of Blaseball, Blaseball's kind of like the Hunger Games, where you're not actually playing as Katniss or any of the people that are in the actual battle itself. You're like on the outside. You're the capital, the people with the weird hair and the weird makeup, and you basically like have a favorite team or a favorite Hunger Games, like a Katniss, and you basically are doing everything in your power to influence what happens like on the actual battle stage. So that might be sending something like a care package to Katniss, right? Or the Kansas City Breath Mints. And you and the fans that are aligned behind this one team are basically trying to intervene into the natural course of events that might be already occurring. Is that a better way to
That
think
is
about
a
it?
great pitch, and I kind of want to just steal that because I think that's one of the more succinct ways that I've ever heard somebody describe what the Blaseball experience is like.
Oh, perfect. Okay, great. Well, I'm glad that I didn't mess it up that I understand. Because I think it's really interesting. It's like when we've talked about a lot of like what are the opportunities that cloud gaming or blockchain or anything can provide. A lot of this is like, okay, what new genres of game development can we unlock using these technologies? But I'm really interested, obviously, in this fascination because it doesn't sound like, at least from the surface, that you guys are using any of those to really drive the actual underlying tech stack of the game itself. But before we kind of get into that, I think the coolest thing, honestly, about Blaseball is just the level of community interaction that you guys have been able to generate and the fandom around the seasons and the teams, et cetera. So, you mentioned that you have all of your fans grouped up in Discord, but can you share a little bit more about like how they participate? How do they lead coalitions to enact changes? Is it almost like a guild system in World of Warcraft, right? Just share a little bit more about the specific, what buttons am I clicking? What other players am I cajoling into doing other things? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, so at the beginning we were relying entirely on Discord for the community layer, and we're starting to build some more integrated community features based on the top behaviors that we were seeing in the Discord. And it ranges. Like not every fan wants to do the same thing. There's certain fans that want to be like strategy people, and they come up with these amazing voting guides. I'll have like spreadsheets and Excel that they share across the other fans of the team. They would blast on social media these like kind of propaganda like posters to get people to vote for the things that they wanted them to vote for. So that was really their MO, was like, how do we optimize our team? How do we give ourselves the best chance of winning? Then we have other fans that are more interested in coming up with stories and background stories for the different characters in the game. So we may have one of our classic Blaseball players, Jessica Telephone, inspired all sorts of fan stories and background information just based on the little bits of it's funny, sometimes I forget like how insane it sounds for me to just say something like Jessica Telephone because I say it 1,000 times a day, but or things like it 1,000 times a day. But yeah.
Sorry, I have to stop laughing. Such a ridiculous name.
I mean, I get it. Oh, it's not even close to our most ridiculous names too. But anyway, yeah. So some of the fans love to write backstories and come up with fan art. Since we don't actually show any of the characters in the game, we leave the fans to tell us what they're seeing and to come up with their own artwork, to create like a wide variety of interpretations. And that also leads to, while none of that stuff is canon, it gives the game a lot of soul and texture and makes it feel like you're witnessing this thing that so many people are getting something slightly different out of.
Oh, that's really fascinating, especially the part that you didn't even start with like base art in a way. That's really, really interesting, because I think one of the things I looked at a company, or know of a company that I looked at over the summer, that's called 555 Games, and they're basically building like interwoven anime comics into like social media feeds. And
That's
it's
cool.
this idea that people are like shipping and creating backstories for someone like Jessica Telephone, but that stuff is happening like in the comments, like, oh, like, can't believe she went out last Thursday. And then you're like, oh, Jessica went out last Thursday. Like, I wonder what she was doing. And then someone else comments in the comments, like, yeah, I saw her at the Dusty Shack. And then you have this like spiraling story out of that. And I find that to be like, especially like with the fact that there was like no art, or, like in that regard, right? Like, so do you guys empower specific community creators who are maybe like the most active? Let's just say you have an artist that's, been making character art for all these guys. Do you compensate that person? And how do you motivate them? Are they just doing it out of their own goodwill?
So right now, we do our best to feature any community art that we really love, like just through like general retweets and such on our social accounts. But we try to also incentivize people that don't get seen a lot too, to feel comfortable sharing. One of the interesting community behaviors that we saw was that things that kind of feel like contests are not, they don't feel great for our fans, at least. It starts to make it feel like the reason that we're creating is to get seen or to get a certain type of recognition, which actually goes against usually their initial motivation, which is just because they like the game and have an idea that they want to share with other fans of the game. So it's a fine line for us to balance, but so far we haven't needed to like really latch onto like one or two particular creators, because there's been so many people making so much art and stories around Blaseball.
Got it. And how did the first person start? I think this is like one of the conundrums of a community or a user generated content wheel where you have so many people starting. Can you walk me through like meeting your guys' first creator? Right. Because now it seems like it's easy. You have this army of people that are just rabid Blaseball fans that are like, oh, no, my picture, no, my backstory. Right. But how did it start in the very, very beginning? I guess you sounds like you launched it during the pandemic, right? So 2020-ish?
Yeah. We playtest a lot as a studio. So I think our first fans were people that we just shared the game with that liked it and told their friends about it before it came out. We made the game very quickly, but from the beginning we had a Discord server up to just have a level of community engagement with it. And we saw early on, like one of the reasons that we decided to keep making it is, we make all sorts of prototypes at the studio that never see the light of day. But this one, the people that were coming and playing were telling stories, and were getting really invested in these fictional characters. Even people that that I know in real life that I had never expected to latch onto those parts of the game. So that's when we really knew we were onto something. When we first launched the game, the first week didn't have a ton of signups, but it had a few, and the people that jumped into it loved it and talked about it nonstop. One of those really important first players was a writer for Vice who wrote an article about it after that first week. And I think that article brought in a lot of people for the second week. And then from then on, it was a lot of like kind of finding communities that were slightly adjacent to us. We had a sponsor early on it was Friends at the Table, which is a popular like tabletop role-playing game style podcast. And they loved the game, asked to sponsor it. Their audience jumped on board and loved it. So that kind of thing, it was It's just like finding like slowly like branching out and getting more and more people that would naturally be predisposed to liking this type of thing.
Fascinating. Yeah, I think it's just always so interesting. Like, how did you get that first start? Where did you, in the slope to exponential growth, like when did it begin, and what was the impetus for that? And it sounds like you got very lucky, and that somebody happened to join your community that happened to be a journalist, which is very, very cool. And then it kind of grew from there. And it sounds like from the very beginning you were working and playing with your community, but I think some of the frictions that we often see with community and studio partnered games are when the developer wants to do something that the community doesn't want them to do. And so, how have you guys, kind of wrangled with the idea of maybe deeply disagreeing with something that the community has done? Are there any off limits like signposts?
Yeah, that's definitely been something that we've struggled with before. And what we're trying to do is, I wouldn't say that we've completely figured it out yet, but what we're at least trying to do is be very clear about what the community's role is in the experience. So, if we go back to that tabletop role-playing game metaphor, in a tabletop game, there's kind of three storytellers. There's the game masters that are setting the stage and guiding the experience. There's the players themselves who are saying, like, I want to go into that cave, or I want to attack that enemy, and showing the game master what they're excited about. And then there's the roll of the dice. And in our case, we have us, the game designers, playing the role as the game masters. We have the fans, and we have the simulation, which is our stand-in for the roll of the dice. And when you view it like that, you wouldn't expect a player in a tabletop role-playing game to be able to say, I don't want to be in a fantasy world, I want to be in a science fiction world. Like, that's off limits. We've already set the stage. We know where we are right now. So we do our best to kind of establish boundaries and to really explain what the constraints are and the possibility space is at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what about even like let's just take Jessica Telephone, for example. How does the studio, I might ask a hard question, but like, let's just say, or maybe not Jessica Telephone, but another character, right? Let's just say they make that person, I don't know, a Nazi. What happens now?
Yeah, so we have an amazing team of community designers and community moderators that work around the clock to make sure stuff like that doesn't happen. And if it does, we get rid of it as soon as we possibly can. We've taken a really firm stance very early on. We just don't allow any hate speech or anything that even comes anywhere near that in our community. And I think, like, by having those clear guidelines and having clear principles from the beginning, it doesn't feel like there's a moving target. It feels like everybody knows what they're signing up for, and if they're not on board, then they're going to get kicked out.
I see. And do you kind of cancel that action and also correspondingly cancel the player and their account, or do you do more of a like, hey, slap on the wrist, be careful, don't do this kind of thing again. You can still stay a part of our community, but if you do this one more time, you're out.
It's usually the latter, but it depends on what the offense is. If it's something like your Nazi example, we're going to take a more serious route than if it's something that's just kind of slightly inappropriate.
Interesting. Yeah, I think like the community involvement with games has been some of the biggest. It's one of the biggest like gifts and boons that has been given to game development. We know that games like Half-Life and stuff like that came from community development and an iteration maybe on like the platform the developer gave them. But there's still a ton of recalcitrance from, a AAA developer community to be so influenced by the community, right? Because at the end of the day, like there's, designers think that, they know best, right? Not the community versus, but I think Blaseball in a cool way is built to take input from the community in a way that there's still guardrails, there's still a game master, and yet it still feels like safe and organized and not just like a bunch of chaos where nothing makes sense, right? Like Jessica Telephone is a crazy funny character, but it still seems organized, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I read last year Sid Meier's memoir, and he has a chapter in there where he talks about how he's very resistant to mod support and I think cheat codes early on in his games, and then eventually warmed up to it when he started to realize just like the amazing variations and permutations that the community started to create around his games. And I think that's one of the most special things about this forum, is that when you put it out there, it starts to kind of become a dialogue where you never really know everything about what you've created when it's a game, because games are interactive, and the way that players play them is going to be different, and the things that they get out of them is going to be different, and fostering a space for them to express what they're seeing and what they love in the game design itself is really really rewarding. We always are looking for ways to provide players with just as much meaningful choice as they possibly can have in the game, which means that by necessity we can't control everything, because choice isn't interesting if if we're only giving you like 3 outcomes that we very carefully tailored.
Got it. And so, okay, so there's a ton of community interaction. So how does the community interaction influence the kind of moving away from only talking about the community to more about like how do you actually build and like live ops this game, right? From the conversation so far, can tell and discern that Blaseball structured in seasons, right? How do you plan patching? How do you plan updates given there's such a high level of participation? How do you let your audience know that this season is about to happen and ensure that people like don't feel upset because they've missed it, because they missed some announcement? Can you share a little bit about like how you're running Blaseball kind of as a live game?
Yeah. So in the past, we ran Blaseball in this era structure where we would run a full era of the game, which was typically a few months long. And we would have 10 plus seasons or so in that era, each season being a week long. Then we would go on what we call a siesta to develop the next era. And then we come back with another one. We're working really hard right now to get out of that structure, because it's not particularly sustainable, to have like these very long gaps where the game isn't live, and then to come back for a brief period of time and then to go away again. There's a lot of challenges that I'm sure you've already started to hit the nail on the head on. Like, how do you keep people informed about when they can come back? What happens if you're a new interested fan and you go to the game and there's nothing to play? So our goal is to always have a version of Blaseball that is live and interesting and compelling for new players to jump into as well. We're working towards it right now. We have started off with our new version of the game. We ran a few seasons, and we have kind of an upgraded version coming out. We haven't announced the time frame yet, but pretty soon. That hopefully, if we're doing our jobs right, once it's back up again, we were going to have a lot less downtime until the point where we have none.
Got it. Interesting. I would suspect also that since players are kind of voting through quorum for a lot of factions, right? You need to vote within 24 hours of this item, and I live in Asia and it's the day ahead and it's not Saturday, it's Sunday or whatever this problem is. And so I think that's probably like been a very hard thing to manage, right? And so in that regard, how have you really tried to Are there been specific tricks or tools that you've used to facilitate like the community involvement, or do you really kind of leave that to each team, right, in the Discord to figure out on their own?
Yeah, so one of the major focuses for this latest version of Blaseball is surfacing the schedule a lot more, since it's a game that is played on a fixed schedule. And we use all sorts of helpful tools to get people to know when things are happening, through social, through email messages, push notifications when the mobile app is out. So all of that. But yes, the game itself is pretty time zone specific right now. Most of our players are in North America, but we do have a good bit in the UK as well. Not too many in Asia just yet. But that means that we're tailoring the game mostly to those time zones. Now, as far as how we would potentially make something that is more global, it probably can't look and feel exactly like what we've done with Blaseball so far. We could certainly adapt Blaseball for different audiences, and like you have different sports leagues around the world. But we're interested right now in trying to figure out what an experience that takes a lot of kind of the heart and soul of Blaseball is, that but is designed to be played on more of a global scale.
I think this is just me going out on a limb here, but I watch a lot of anime. I watch a lot of sports animes, and Japan loves baseball.
Yeah.
I feel like Blaseball would do great in Japan.
I feel the same way.
Oh, perfect. I think that there is kind of like that. You almost see it kind of in sports animes like Haiku, and which is about volleyball, and like whatever Prince of Tennis, where you have this kind of like fandom around supporting a specific team, and it's also kind of ridiculous because then there's a murder in the high school, and it's all perfectly feeding in there. But I think to go back to the point of where your communities are in the West and the UK, how do you guys plan as a development studio to kind of live ops that? Because if your team is basically running a 24-hour, all week sprint on the season, right? And if you're, not staffed in that region, how do you think about like giving that live feeling if you don't have devs that are awake to react to what the community does?
Yeah. One of the things that we've done is we set particular events at very prescribed times to react to what the community does then. Okay. So, an example would be like our elections. Our elections are at the exact same time every single week. So I've been making choices all throughout the week, or I've been voting for the choice that I want to win, and I know exactly when I'm going to find out if it wins. And we get to prepare for when those results are coming in, and behind the scenes we know what's going to come in ahead of time because we can see the results coming in. Then we also, one of our famous storytelling devices is we have these full takeovers of the site where the gods of Blaseball appear and talk in real time to the fans, and those are also they're opportunities for us to, whenever we feel like it's appropriate, to jump in and react to what the fans are doing. But as far as how do we, if something happens in the middle of the night or so, typically we're finding out first thing in the morning and figuring out how we can react to it based on one of the events that we already have scheduled. So maybe we have 3 or 4 hours into the next structured schedule event. How can we tie in a positive or exciting reaction to it then? That said, though, on the community moderation side, we have overnight moderators as well who just work in shifts so that we can moderate the community 24/7.
Do you mind sharing maybe an example story of like waking up in the morning and like reacting to something the community has done and being like, oh shit, like we gotta like, can you share any stories about what that might actually be like?
Oh my God. It's usually, I'm not sure I remember one in particular, but I mean, there's been several points where we wake up and like a popular character is dead. And, it's like, okay, popular character is dead. How do we make sure that the whole audience knows about this? And what does that mean for the story itself? Usually the characters themselves aren't like, the story isn't wrapped around any particular character, but it might create some opportunities for us to think about ways to surface exciting abilities from other characters, or give certain teams abilities and things like that through the election down the road.
Got it. Yeah, it reminds me a lot of like in the Twitch Plays Pokemon where they released ops, whatever it is, like the starter Charmander or whatever, and like the community voted to release the starter Pokemon, which just like yeah, like my heart has been stabbed, right? And it's kind of like you wake up every morning, and I think in that regard, it's probably like a very hard thing as a development studio to be doing, because it sounds almost like you're basically like your style of working is basically being on these like periodic sprint cycles of just like, okay, like this one is like, it's almost like production, right? Of just being on like, live ops, right? And instead of people playing content that you post actively have created, it's like everything's happening all at the same time. But I bet it's a pretty exciting thing to basically be like, all right, I'm going to bed. I wonder what's going to happen. Like, will Jessica be alive tomorrow?
It's exciting and stressful because it can feel for us like very hard to pull away because, at any point you could be looking at the game and seeing interesting, exciting stories. We are working right now, I can't give any specifics, but on ways for at least our development team to have basically like a much clearer picture of exciting things that are happening in the game whenever they happen without needing to do so much manual work.
Got it.
Yeah.
And so then I guess this is going to go back to the main question of, why Blaseball is I guess backable, but where does monetization come into this at all? Are you guys thinking about that? What kind of monetization does the game currently survive on?
It isn't in the game yet, but it is coming very soon. We've been working on it for a long time. The first versions of it are going to be primarily around cosmetics. So we are building in a lot of cosmetic, community features into the game to support cosmetics. I can't really give too many specifics yet, but they're essentially around these collectible pins that you can use in the community layer. That's coming into the game pretty soon. The second part that we're exploring a lot right now is on. I'm trying to think about how I can talk about this without going too specific. But if you think about with live sports, we go into a lot of these live sporting events, and we pay for things that happen once while we're there. You might spend money to get a message on the Jumbotron. You might spend money to get a really great seat in the game that might increase your chance of getting on the scoreboard or something like that. Those are the types of things that we're looking to like the real world analogy and how we can replicate it here. So yeah, to back up for a second, we've been working for a long time on the monetization. It isn't in there yet, as the game is just kind of slowly coming back online. But we'll have the cosmetics in there pretty soon for people to play with.
Oh, that's fascinating. I'd never thought about the Jumbotron and things like that, which I think is really, really, really interesting. And I think it also, a lot of this, it kind of begs the question as to, we have been talking about blockchain games for forever, right? And we're like, what genre of game works with blockchain games? Is it Web3 card games because cards make sense because there's some sort of physical in the real world, you physically own your cards, so why would you own the digital ones? Or is it a game that has a strong community and therefore you issue a token and compensate your community through, token equity, right? And so how in this huge up and down volatility of crypto, FTX, whatever, have you guys thought about incorporating any kind of blockchain elements? And if so, why or why not?
Yeah. We typically, when we look at new technologies, we go, okay, can this make our game better? And if it can make our game better, we adopt it. If it can't make our game better, or we can't see a natural path for it, we don't adopt it. And with crypto and blockchains, we haven't found anything obvious. A lot of the solutions that we've seen so far, they don't feel like they're making the player's experience any better. You can maybe earn money while you play the game, but that's not what our players are here for. They're here because they want to have fun and enjoy the experience. So that would sort of almost like change the incentive structure of the game. So that wouldn't really work for us. And yeah, outside of it too, like it's to get something that you could then potentially sell or have like some sort of active commerce that comes out of it it's a motivation that I hear a lot more in, I guess, like in the tech world than like the games world. When I talk to our players and to people that like love games, you just don't hear people talk about that much. And we're skeptical, to say the least.
You should come to the panel at 5:30 to 6:30 to talk, voice your opinions. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, yeah. It's more just wondering because it's a very this like voting and quorum and player influence is, I think, one of the value propositions that I think a lot of blockchain and evangelists kind of tout for is like, organize into supporting a specific team or organize into supporting a specific commodity price and push it up, like using, diplomatic tactics or your voting rights that is attached to your token, which I think is, in a way does have implications on game design, right? Because if you set up that kind of economic structure, you have a nudge and that you didn't used to have before in game design, right? So it's just curious to hear sort of the opinions on it.
We find that for the most part, any of the the kind of blockchain based game ideas that we've seen so far could also be done without the blockchain. And we have all of those those structures in the game itself right now. You can vote. We have communities built into the game. We have unlockable rewards. You can watch a simulated league and participate, and like all of that stuff is working on servers, and it's not requiring any form of blockchain at all. I think like there has been so many times where a technological breakthrough comes in where it's immediately obvious what the applications are for games. When 3D rendering became a thing, and Nintendo showed us what that can do with Super Mario 64. Obvious application. Even Blaseball itself is taking things like Discord and these existing technologies and putting them together in a way that creates a form that is very new. I'm eager to see if anybody comes up with anything that creates a better game with blockchain, but it's been around for a while now and I haven't seen it yet. And I think that's where a lot of my skepticism is going in. And, I've talked to a lot of really good game designers who haven't yet figured out like something brand new that can come with this.
Sure. That's very fair. And so I think, given that we're, want to talk a little bit, talked a lot about Blaseball, but talked not as much about the studio and being a studio founder. You've actually been running the studio for a long time, right? You said that you founded the studio in 2015, initially got publishing money, and then raised venture capital in 2020. How have you done, maybe combated, attracting talent, competing with the AAA world? How big is your team right now? Can you share a little bit about sort of like the studio journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are about 27 people right now, and we actually are very fortunate with talent in that there's a lot of great people that have come to us. Some of them from our community, which is wonderful. We have a really talented community. A lot of folks that were in engineers already, developing tools and such around Blaseball that were eager to come work for us. But also, one of the things that we felt really worked well is that Blaseball is built on web and app frameworks, and we're working on a mobile app that's built on a tech stack that is more familiar to people in the tech world than is to people in the video game world. So that meant that we could go and to all these tech companies and find folks that always dreamed of working on video games but never had the opportunity to because their skill set didn't match. So we have this really amazing mixture of people on our team from both worlds, and I think it leads to just this really interesting mesh of talent and conversations, and it's great to see. Our director of engineering came from the tech world. We have a lot of designers and such that came from that world as well, and it's fun to see what's shared between the two, and also fun to see like a lot of the things that break down are just like jargon and different terms for the same thing.
Huh. I'm going to follow up a little bit there. So I assume that means that you might be writing in a different code base. So you're not writing necessarily like in C++ or C#, right? Because you're on. Is that part of it? I think like a lot of engineers that I know, like software engineers in general, like don't know the languages that a lot of games are written in, which very much disenfranchises them into like catching up. Like you can't go work on Unreal or Unity if you don't know these languages, right? So.
Totally. Yeah, we were, a Unity studio by trade, and then we completely shifted when we went to Blaseball. Blaseball is built on like the mobile apps in React Native, or we're using React on the site, JavaScript and such, and like these are TypeScript. Like these are not tool sets or frameworks that are familiar to game makers, but they are very familiar to anybody working in the tech world. So it's kind of the reverse, in our case, and for us that's really played to our advantage.
No, that's a fantastic and very interesting talent edge. I think a lot of people are trying to sell like the dream, right? Like, oh, like you're always get to work on games, but you're kind of knocking on the door of all the same people, and those people actually have 8 offers. One's from Riot and one's from Bungie, and then one's from Respawn, and you're like, okay, well, how am I going to get these guys? And so I think you guys have really been quite clever and sort of like gone fishing in a different pond, which is really cool. And so you've again have been out here for 7 years, and there's an environment right now where there's a lot of ex Blizzard, ex Riot, ex EA founders that are taking a crack at making new games at either venture-backed studios or backed by publishing money. Sort of what advice would you give to these new studio founders who maybe have started up in the past 2 to 3 years?
I would say embrace the unexpected. The only reason that the game band is still around today is because we were willing to take a chance on a game that was completely different than the one that we had made before, and kind of reinvent ourselves. And this industry changes every 6 months drastically, and I think it's really important, especially as a small company, to develop a way that you can quickly adapt and quickly change as the tides turn. We are really focused right now on being nimble, making things that are fast to make and really creative and really interesting. But won't take us 4 or 5 years, because by the time that a game like that comes out, it could be irrelevant based on where the industry goes.
Okay. And so then now I'm going to ask the leading question. I think, you said that you only raised venture money in 2020. Is it perhaps the fast iteration that was appealing to a venture capital studio, because that's more like classic lean launchpad product launch dev cycles of tech products, right? Like fail fast, move and sprint. So, this is I guess what I'm asking to you is more, what made Blaseball, since it also doesn't really have a monetization system, backable. Monetization yet, right? So backable from the VC side, right? A lot of founders are out there trying to raise their first price round right now. So
I think one of the things that worked really well in our favor is that it's completely new. There's nothing out there like Blaseball. And we have the opportunity to define this category of entertainment and be the leader in it. And that means that we're going to have to experiment and explore a little bit more than, if we were going and making something that was very similar to something out there. So when we talk about monetization, we are in monetization exploration mode right now, trying to understand what works best for this style of experience, rather than just doubling down and optimizing on a bunch of existing things. We can't just slap a battle pass on it and expect it to work. We have to go back to the drawing board a little bit and see what really feels native. But I think that is very exciting. If we succeed, then we have proven an alternate path, and we have defined an entirely new type of genre, and hopefully brought in a much broader and more diverse player base than games typically are able to reach.
I think that's so on the money. I think, and as a business person who has helped to try to support the monetization models of games and evolve them over time to adapt to a specific kind of player base, I think that's totally spot on. You can't. Crypto tried to build economies first, the games afters. AAA mostly builds the game first and is like, well, if we make it, they will come. And then you kind of have this non-integrated feeling of how the business model doesn't really link to the gameplay or what that consumer base even values. And so I think that's an awesome evolution to see a studio grow into focusing on that. And so I guess as a final question, sort of, what's next for Blaseball? Besides monetization, you mentioned the tabletop thing. Is there an idea to make a board game, or will you guys just double down on the franchise as it stands right now?
So there is a card game that is coming out fairly soon as well. We're very excited about it. Worked with some friends of ours on it. But yeah, outside of that, the game is starting back up pretty soon. Mobile app is coming out very soon. Monetization will follow. The integrated community features will follow. There's a lot that we've been working on for a long time that is finally going to start to make its way into the game that we're really, really excited about. We've learned a lot about the types of things that work within Blaseball and the types of things that don't work within Blaseball. So we're really excited to test out all of our ideas on how to make it even better.
Okay. And if I've been totally convinced by this podcast, which everybody should be, that Blaseball should be my new game that I'm going to try, when's the next season starting? When can I play next?
Soon. I can't give you an exact date.
Is it a Blizzard? Is it a Blizzard soon TM or like an actual? Is it a soon?
It's soon. It's going to be soon. But go on to blaseball.com and sign up. You'll be able to get email updates to find out when it's coming back. Join our Discord and follow us on Twitter. We're very active there too.
That's awesome. All right. Well, Sam, it was truly a pleasure having you on. And I know you're coming to GDC, so I'm excited to meet in person.
Likewise.
And if anyone in the audience here is actually more curious about the Game Band's mission and how they lead their vibrant community, Sam, I believe one of your community members is giving a talk also at GDC. Can you share a few more details?
Yeah, Bria, our community director, is giving a talk at GDC. She is giving a talk on fandom as a whole and all of our learnings about fandom through making Blaseball. It's a really good talk. I've seen it, of course. Strongly endorse. You should definitely go see it.
What day? What time?
I don't think GDC has announced the exact schedule yet, but yeah. So I guess just stay tuned for it.
Okay, so all right, everybody, if in the audience, if you want to check it out, go to the GDC conference website, search the Game Band, and you should probably find it. And so, Sam did share like how follow the community, but if there are people out in the audience that are really interested in connecting with you, maybe they're interested in jumping ship from their AAA studio, and like they want to work on a genre-defining game. How can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, feel free to, let's see, I usually would say feel free to follow me on Twitter and DM me, but I'm a lot less active there these days. But that's still, I think, a pretty decent way to do it. I'm Sam Rosenthal on Twitter. I still will check it at least once a week.
Oh, that's good. There's a lot of apps to check now. It's
a lot of stuff.
Honestly, you're inundated with notifications. Yeah. Okay, so this is epic. And so thank you to our listeners. We hope to see some of you at GDC at any of the panel sessions or events. Reminder, there's a Naavik event on Thursday, the 23rd. My panel, which will close at the Free to Play Summit on Tuesday. And then a Game Band talk, which you can, on an undetermined time and date, but is on the website somewhere. And so until next time, friends, feel free to hit me up at alexandra@naavik.co if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Would love to hear your feedback. And with that, au revoir. See you next time.
If you enjoyed today's episode, whether on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, or give a 5-star review. And if you want to reach out or provide feedback, shoot us a note at podcast@naavik.co or find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Plus, if you want to learn more about what Naavik has to offer, make sure to check out our website, www.naavik.co. There, you can sign up for the #1 games industry newsletter, Naavik Digest, level up your insights with our premium research platform, Naavik Pro, or contact us to learn about our wide-ranging consulting and advisory services. Again, that is www.naavik.co. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.